Professor LUKOYE ATWOLI is a professor of psychiatry and dean at Aga Khan University Medical College. He's with us in the studio. Prof, good morning.
Morning.
It's good to have you in the studio again.
Thank you.
This time in my presence.
Yeah.
Last time you were here, I was just watching you remotely. And now it's good to have you here.
I hope you're getting some psychological support after your ordeal.
The ordeal of the time?
Yeah.
But how much is enough?
Yeah. Enough is enough, as they say.
Yeah, I'm still getting the support that I require.
Good.
Prof, as we got into the voting day, the Registrar of Political Parties penned an article which was published, I think, in all major newspapers. And she was talking about it's important for us to consider offering a shoulder and some support to the winners and the losers of this election, because they are going through a bruising battle. And the winners and losers that she was talking about were mainly the candidates, but she also made reference to their supporters. You have been saying these things also in various other quarters and forums. What kind of support is it? I mean, why do people need support after just going through a normal thing like just vote or get voted out, spend money, you lose it, you go home?
I think that's a good question. Why? Firstly, I mean, it's absurd that the voters should need support after voting. It's absurd, but it's worthy to discuss. It's something worthy discussing in this country, in the context that people need support after experiencing potentially traumatic events, not after doing pleasant things, civic duty, and doing your job. But in this country, our history shows that elections are often potentially traumatic events. Elections in the past have been matters of life and death for many people. Elections have meant economic ruin for some people. Elections have meant social disruption for some people. It shouldn't be so, but the way we have designed the architecture of our republic, it is so. And this is why I think somebody dropping into this country from Mars, hearing the registrar of political parties telling the country that you are going to need support after the elections, that person would wonder, are you going to war? Are you what's going on in this country? And that's not how it should be. So anybody who has gone through a potentially traumatic event will have to find a mechanism of dealing with it or coping. Most humans who go through potential traumatic events are able to cope and navigate it successfully without too much external intervention. But a few will require additional support. So our elections have been like that, and this is why people worry, people are anxious. But what I would say is that it's perfectly normal to be anxious and worried before you face a potentially traumatic event. And I repeat, elections shouldn't be potentially traumatic events. So in future, we should be thinking about ways of making sure that people don't need to feel like that before, during, and after an election. Because it should just be a routine thing. You go, you get a ballot, you have a list of names, and to your mind, it would be nice if one of those people won, but it's not the end of the world if the other person won. That's how it should be.
Prof, how do you get people to disassociate political leadership with development, social and economic progress? Because, unfortunately, that association seems to be cast in concrete in our minds, so that the choice cannot be something that someone looks at academically. And then how also do you divorce that very feeling with the affiliation that someone has to somebody who becomes the president, and again relating that to what you see as progress along the same lines that would come to you as a result of that association or in the absence of it?
So these are two things, and both of them are contestable. Firstly, it is arguable, it is something that we can discuss, whether the Kenyan voter connects socio-economic development with the decisions they make at the ballot. I think there are people who would argue that the average Kenyan voter doesn't necessarily do that. But there are many people who do. Now, the human mind is an interesting thing. There's a concept of confirmation bias in the sense that when we make decisions, after we've made a decision, we will look for evidence to support that decision. Okay? So if I go to the ballot and I vote for as an individual, after that, if somebody came to me and told me this guy is bad for this country and so on, I will find reasons to support my decision, because our minds don't like to be in a state that we call cognitive dissonance, where you have two ideas that are competing inside your brain and they're opposite of each other. So we are set up to try and resolve that dissonance by providing evidence that the decision we made is a good decision, is a good decision for ourselves, is a good decision for the country, is a good decision for the world, even when confronted by evidence that this is not so. So this is just how the human mind works. So bringing these abstract concepts of saying, yeah, the decision you made at the ballot is going to make us lose $10 million in our economy and so on. Somebody says, no, but it will gain a social cohesion. It will make us feel good. Money is not everything. So we rationalize because we have already made the decision.
When you say, Prof, that, the elections and the way in which they're carried out should not be such a traumatic event for people, but the entire process lends to just that. Whether it is politicians coming and preying, and I use that word carefully, on the emotional instability of the people that they're speaking to, because it's a direct emotional investment for people. I mean, yesterday we saw people who had cried the whole night. We saw people who are in a state of despair because their person did not win. Can we really remove the trauma of the event when the entire process was an emotional investment?
Yeah. So I think, and it's unfortunate, it's just how we are set up, that there's a huge stakes that are placed on the individuals that we go to vote for. And the reason is that, as I said earlier, our history is such that if you elect a certain person, in the past at least, and that person looks nothing like you, doesn't talk like you, doesn't come from where you come from, then chances are that for the next 5 years, you're going to experience real suffering. In the sense that, if the roads in your area are potholed, they remain potholed for 5 years. If your children are not going to good schools, there will be no good schools for 5 years. And the converse is thought to be true, that if you vote for somebody who looks like you, who talks like you, who behaves like you, that then there will be real, actual benefits. And this is the emotion that goes into those elections. Now, since 2010, obviously, there have been attempts to try and restructure the country so that it doesn't really matter to a huge extent who you vote for, but there are certain basic things that should be guaranteed to you.
Yes.
This is one of the ways of trying to deal with that, so that ultimately, in future, hopefully, when people go to an election, it will not mean that I am making a decision that will hurt me or benefit me significantly over the next 5 years. It will just be that we are now putting in place people who will steward our national resources equitably for the next 5 years. So if we have that baseline understanding and agreement, it will become less and less important who we place in those positions. And ultimately, it should be completely irrelevant because everybody who should be coming up for leadership should be a person who is committed to certain national ideals, certain basic values, to the extent that whoever you elect, the only suffering you will have is that, oh my goodness, the decision I made was not validated by a majority of others. I voted for the minority candidate, and that's still okay.
Talking about the candidates, why is it that candidates go through a traumatic experience in an election period? I mean, every day in life, you're facing challenges and you're, juggling and balancing, and you win some, you lose some. But in the case of an electoral process, the lose is not lose some, it is lose all. Why?
This is because of, for many of the candidates who vie for political positions in this country, this is the most significant decision they're ever going to make in their entire lives. For many of them, this is the biggest gamble, if you like, that they're making in their entire life. And many of them will throw everything at it. Many of them will find their resources from wherever. They will borrow, they will sell property, they will do all sorts of things, throwing it at this chance. And again, the reason is that in the past, getting into a political office in this country has been a ticket to economic empowerment.
Sure.
It has been the way to get out of poverty, if you like. It has been the way to join the big leagues. And so people look at it as an investment when they're going into it, and they'll do anything to try and get into those positions. And so when you don't succeed, obviously this is a huge loss, and you have to find ways of dealing. And indeed, many people get a lot of distress, psychological distress. There are many people who have told stories, even in the media, about how they went into a state of despondency for many years after losing an election. How when they meet people who used to praise them and tell them you're the next leader, they have felt violent instincts within them towards those people. But this is just the nature, again, of how we have set ourselves up, that getting into a political seat gives you economic opportunities that you wouldn't otherwise have if you were not in this position. And honestly, this is not how it should be. In my view, I mean, and I think in the interregnum before this election, there were interesting developments in the courts where now becoming an MP doesn't necessarily mean that you have a bundle of shillings at your discretion. You can use the way you want. That's getting a little bit tightened. And hopefully when you're president, it doesn't mean that you can channel national resources into your village. It's a lot more difficult. And as that gets more and more difficult, then it will attract less and less of the greedy, rapacious minds among us who look at it as an opportunity to get in and loot. That is the hope that we have, and I think that's the hope of the 2010 Constitution, that we start eliminating those opportunities for leaders to get into power in order to empower themselves rather than to provide stewardship of our national resources.
You're hopeful, eh?
I'm the eternal optimist.
The structure of government that we have seen, especially after the promulgation of the Constitution, is where, yes, we are putting in all those, we are closing the doors and putting hinges and doing all these things.
Yeah.
But that's not where the people are getting the money from. It's not from the just lose 100 million shilling CDF per year. I mean, what's that? I can get that in a day. It is that day. It is the access to the opportunities to, because you're a big shot, then you can participate. You have access to information at the planning stage that a certain program or project is about to be implemented. You then position yourself properly to actually be the one that wins the tender. And we are seeing very many of the people who have made money is from that. It's from just doing business with government. And it's because of their privileged position that they're able to do business with government. It's not changing.
No, I think we beat ourselves up a little bit more than we should. Perhaps we have higher expectations of ourselves than the resources we have at our disposal allow us to
We're living even beyond our own means.
Yeah, our minds are way ahead of our means, if you like. We want to be a certain perfect society, but in the grander scheme of things, we are a toddler. We are still learning how to walk. This democracy thing is still an experiment. Getting strangers to take care of our resources is still a difficult thing for us to do. So we look for the familiar, and we want, well, even if he's stealing, is our thief.
Ours.
Yeah. So we are still there. We make strides, but we expect to be doing the long jump before we even learn how to walk. So that's a good thing. It's a good. We have high aspirations. And the only thing that we need to do now is to match our aspirations with our actions at this time, but not to think that we can change this mindset that we inherited already from the colonial infrastructure, which was really extractive, which was about coming in and getting as much as we can from this place and then moving on to one that is more supportive of the people and that promotes people's pursuit of their own happiness rather than the pursuit of a cabal's happiness. It's baby steps, I think.
You said something that's really interesting and maybe would then dismantle the reasons why people vote. And for years it's been, and if you look at how it happens from a political party to individuals, it's about the person who's coming in. A political party is led by
Yeah.
an individual, not an ideology. I mean, at least on this side of things, right? But then you've said, how about we start to vote based on who will be able to come and set structures in place that will guarantee that there are certain things will, at the barest minimum, will be done.
Yeah.
And so you don't even have to think about that. Will we have an infrastructure in place that the country can run? And that's far removed from how people would normally make this decision, making a decision based on an individual. It's CT, it's Eric, it's Professor LUKOYE. It is the person and what they can be, the be all and end all of everything, as opposed to seeing, can we put in somebody who will maintain, improve, develop structures for the country?
It will happen, not now, because fair attempts were made in fixing institutions in the Constitution, and subsequently we keep improving on them. They're not perfect. They will not be perfect in our lifetime, but we continuously work to improve them. So, for instance, 20 years ago, if we went through an election such as what we went through, and there was disagreement such as the disagreement we have right now, I think you guys would be interviewing somebody else in this studio. We would not be having calm streets as we do 20 years ago, because there were no mechanisms for managing that disagreement with the result. They were not there. And so people did not have an outlet. People did not have a place where they could go and say, listen, something unfair has happened. Can somebody adjudicate fairly and tell us whether this happened or didn't? Today, we have that.
Yes.
And so people can sit down and say, this was a result of the election. I completely disagree with it. I think these guys have done a shambolic process, and I'm going to ask the arbiter to look at what has happened and tell us whether they agree with me. And the followers of this person would say, yes, that's a fair decision, and we will wait to hear what the arbiter says. 20 years ago, that arbiter didn't exist. That system, that structure wasn't there. And so people didn't have an outlet, and people would go out into the streets to express their dissent, to say, this is ridiculous. And once you have people on the streets, anything goes.
Getting them off the street now become the tall order.
So then maybe the coping mechanisms, because the imagery that's in your mind when you hear the registrar of political parties saying, well, we need to come up with ways in which people, you're thinking, okay, so what are we going to do? Set up shrink centers around the city that you can go into a booth, a big tent, go into a booth and have a session. Right. So what we're talking about is coping mechanisms. And one of those coping mechanisms is then start to think differently in terms of what you can do in the future, and then also think about where you've come from.
Yeah. So there are three ways of dealing with a potentially traumatic event when you're faced with it. Obviously, one of the ways is to escape if you can. Get out and just let it burn out, and then you'll come back when things are cooler. But that's not ideal in our setting. Not most of us can't escape. So
everybody go home.
The other strategy, obviously, then is to stay in place until it passes. Right? Like say, okay, this is going to happen. It's going to be crazy, and it has happened, and then continue with your life. But a more adaptive way of dealing with it is to do something about it. It's coming. What can you do to prevent it? What can you do to mitigate it if you cannot prevent it? And what can you do to deal with its aftermath if you can't prevent all those things? And in the context of our electoral processes, the prevention is fixing structures that ensure or assure people that no matter the outcome, they are still valued citizens of the Republic, and that they have opportunities just like the next person.
Okay.
So that's the first thing. Then the next thing, if you have difficulties assuring that, is then to ensure that the people who get elected are bound by certain conventions and rules, that they can't do too much damage to the citizen. And so the citizen, despite feeling completely disappointed that the person they voted for did not win, they don't feel like it's an existential threat, that this person, his being in charge, it means the death of me.
But that's the reality for some people right now. In their mind.
In their mind, yes. And so it's up to, so when the Registrar of Political Parties says provide support, she should be speaking to those leaders and those politicians that they do not bring themselves out as a threat to a portion of our population. They don't come out and make speeches to say, now that I am in charge, wale ambao hawakunipigia mtaona. Okay, so the more conciliatory, and the politicians who have won should be more careful in how they celebrate. And those who have not won, perhaps they should look at, I mean, if somebody feels that it's unfair, the courts ought to be available to them, and systems need to be in place to assure them that something can be done about that. But for the citizen just needs the reassurance that fairness will prevail, and that even if the other guy is in charge, my life is not at risk.
Yeah.
And my livelihood is not at risk.
That is still guaranteed.
So this is the thing that we need to hear from those that are in charge, because obviously we have our doubts. Everybody
But we
sitting there
believe.
has their doubts. Yeah.
So, for example, if William Ruto says, I will not revenge, I will not avenge, I will still be a president of everybody who has not voted for me.
Yeah.
I recognize that I was only voted for by a certain section of the country, but also I recognize that I had 25% in more than, how many counties, cities? 37?
It's 39, they said.
39 counties, blah, 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 but I'll still be a president of all. Are people hearing all those things?
So there's I would say that there's probably a portion of the country that is hearing, to be fair, that there are people who are saying, okay, that makes sense. But there's a portion that's not hearing. And the reason they're not hearing it is because there's the words that you say, and there's how you say them, there's where you say them, and the actions that follow those words. So it is necessary that we hear more of that. And it's necessary that we hear it being said in a supportive, believable, forceful way that says, I mean, even if I wanted to be a bad person, my hands are tied. I'm not going to be able to do anything.
I don't have the capacity
I don't have the capacity to go out and destroy half the country just because I'm in charge. So those that are having difficulty hearing, it's not because of the words that are being said. It's because of what they are hearing and the filter they're using to hear those words, the emotions that accompany the sounds that they're hearing. And so it is necessary that this is addressed, and that, when I hear somebody speaking, I'm hearing exactly what he means to say rather than just the words that they're putting out there.
Let's take a break.
We take a break?
Sorry, City. Yes.
Okay.
29 minutes to 10. Professor LUKOYE ATWOLI is here with us in the studio. We are talking about healing beyond this electoral process, starting to healing for all the people who participated in the election, that's the voters, and then the candidates as well, and especially the losing candidates and their families. The families of the losing candidates. Not all of them were, in fact, not all family members were okay with this person joining the race.
Absolutely.
And then now they joined the race and they have lost and they're coming back here. Oh, and you're now dealing with the double thing.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that after the break.
Yeah.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Professor LUKOYE ATWOLI is still here with us. He's a professor of psychiatry and the dean at the Aga Khan University Medical College. We're talking about healing. Prof, before we are now, in fact, even go into the candidates themselves and their families and their healing, the issue of the people feeling as if they're going to be targeted. I think it starts even with the way the candidates start selling or the way our politics is structured. It's very tribal.
Yeah.
So you've heard of not just the presidential ticket or gubernatorial, just down to the village level. The way you're campaigning for seats is by demonizing the other person.
Yes.
And whipping up the emotion of your would-be supporters and telling them, you guys, if you don't elect me, this person is going to win. And if they win,
Yes.
Kwisha sisi. Kwisha. So how do we get out of that?
Yeah. This is a problem of our politics. I mean, if you listen to Kenyans during the campaigns, you will be left thinking that it's a country that is perfectly divided down the middle. One half are demons, complete demons, and the other half are perfect angels. And that I, who is telling you about it, I'm in the angel side of things.
Yeah.
And so the candidates similarly are cast in black and white. This is evil personified, and this other one is God's best creation. And so people who internalize that view would feel very threatened if the other person wins, because that would mean the devil has taken over. No matter who is winning, there's half of the people thinking the devil is taking over. And this is risky. So what the Registrar of Political Parties ought to do when she says we need support is to work to remove that toxic campaign environment and to have standards that there are things you can't say about another Kenyan who is vying against you, who has been cleared by whatever mechanisms we have put in place to clear people. There are certain things you can't just go saying about them. And there should be consequences to doing that. If you're an MCA candidate in the ward and you're saying this guy should not be elected because he's a foreigner, and that person has been cleared in that ward to vie and is a voter in that ward, there should be some kinds of consequences so that we make it taboo for people to say certain things about fellow Kenyans. And that way, then we start cleaning the system and ensuring that when a voter is going to the ballot, to cast a ballot, they do not think, I am making a decision about how the world will end. I'm just making a decision about who will be a ward representative for 5 years.
Yeah.
And in 5 years, I can eliminate him and put somebody else there and life will go on. And the same for MP and president and so on.
But Prof,
So we need to sanitize the politics so that it stops infecting the minds of Kenyans with ideas about fellow Kenyans that make them look ridiculous. So
are we ready to accept that though? And I'm asking that because we have a commission in place established by us and given powers and authority by us called National Cohesion and Integration Commission. They have all these rules and regulations that they publish, and they say, if you say this, it may be misconstrued. They try to enforce it. Nothing.
I'll be frank with you that that's, and with all respect, that is a toothless bulldog. It's all talk and no action.
No action.
And we've seen this. And I don't know how we can help them.
Is it because of the commission itself, or is it because of us?
I don't know. But the commission was established to help create some kind of compass for us to look at every time we get lost. What do I do in this situation? You can look and say, okay, this is acceptable and this is not acceptable. I don't know that they're doing that very well. They started asking state corporations to say how many people from which tribe they have employed. And that became their main preoccupation. And, every time they do a tribal census, every time there's appointments and so on. And in the minds of people like me, this becomes, your role is to tell us what percent of which ministry are Kikuyu, Kamba, whatever. That's not very helpful. I think they should set themselves higher standards in this country. Concerning the voters that we are talking about and the perceptions and the demons and angels, I will put it to you that there's a Kenyan somewhere who in 2017 participated in campaigns for the president and demonized an individual and voted for the other one because he was an angel. That today, that person reversed. And in this election, that person demonized the other guy and made this other one an angel. So for me, that's something useful to discuss. As to say, so it's possible to actually change. In the period of 5 years, it's possible for somebody to change and say, this guy was a demon, but now he's looking better and better. And maybe he's become an angel. And the other one has now become a demon. And then sit down with this person and interrogate and say, are you serious? I thought angels are forever and demons are forever. What's happening in your mind? And that is what we call cognitive dissonance. And it's a good place to be, because then you start questioning your own perceptions. You start questioning your own attitudes and saying, so this thing of classifying people as fully angel or fully demon is probably not a useful way of classifying people that I'm going to vote for, because it turns out that the one I thought was a demon is somebody that I can actually vote for this year. So it's a good conversation to have, and it's evidence for me that we can change. We can change, even in 5 years.
It's possible.
Yes.
Talking about then also, the political situation as is, it's currently, and then saying those who will be involved, whether you come in as a candidate, aspirant, whatever it is, how then do we get that? I mean, what needs to be done to have would-be politicians to stay away from some of the things that you're saying need to be done in order to not have people so then emotionally invested in this? How can that really happen?
So the first thing, obviously, is to have laws. Laws are a good place to start. To say, there are certain things that are not acceptable, and if you do them, you will be punished. And then let's punish people consistently. Let's not have laws that we don't enforce. Let's not have things we write down but we don't enforce, codes of conduct that we don't enforce. So that's the first thing. But secondly, so this is where this cohesion commission comes in, is to make certain things taboo. In other words, when somebody says certain things, there's such an uproar. You can't say that.
Yeah, immediately.
Yeah, and there's a huge portion of the population that's saying, you can't just say that about a human being. And then people become less likely to say it. For instance, during the campaigns, politicians have been very careful, especially at the national level, about saying certain things that are genocidal.
Yeah.
Because of what we went through in 2007. People are careful, and when somebody has a slip of the tongue, they're quick to apologize because they know there are consequences here, and there's an uproar. So let's make it an uproar a lot more when somebody says something that is uncouth about other people, and it makes politicians less likely to say those things because politicians say things that rile up people, that make people excited, and if they are saying things that are not making people excited, they will stop saying those things. Let's reward them for saying the things that make people, safer things, things that are more realistic and things that do not create division. We can reward them for that. So that's another way of encouraging politicians to behave in a certain way. And importantly, those that eventually succeed in their quest for leadership, let's hold them to a higher standard. Let's hold them to a higher standard. Let's not make excuses for them when they do things that we think are un-Kenyan or things that are inhuman. Let's not make excuses for them.
Right.
Let's hold them to account, and let's make it a lot more difficult for people to do things that are undesirable. And this is something that every citizen can do and should do.
Even as we look at cross sections of people who suffer the loss, I'm still going to go to populate people in the population who are feeling. Again, if you're looking at wins and losses, I mean, obviously those who are on the side that they've won, they really have they're all right.
Yes.
For now,
Yes.
at least.
Yeah.
Those who then are still feeling, heaviness of heart and such, may take it to an extreme, really, then make decisions in the future and we've heard them already. In the last 24 hours, we've heard very many things.
Yes.
Well, why should I vote? Yesterday we had a conversation about, okay, so if this is going to happen, why should I even bother voting? And then even if I do vote, it's not going to make a difference kind of thing. So then they make compounded decisions based on the way they're feeling at the moment. What would you say about that in terms of moving forward? Yeah.
So I think, and here's the thing, obviously from an observer's perspective, the voters are all in one category. They're voters. None of them won.
There's no winner.
None of them
loser.
lost. They voted. The politicians are the ones who have winners and losers among them, those who are competing, and that's fair. However, obviously, celebrating your successful choice is a human thing, and we should not stifle it. Those that feel like my candidates won and I want to celebrate, it's a good thing. We live for that rush, that dopamine rush. Allow them to celebrate. Let's not constrain them and tell them, don't celebrate, don't say this, don't say that.
We're not done yet.
It's unnatural. It's unnatural. But people who feel disappointed that their candidate did not win, we should also allow them to express that disappointment. We should also allow them space to ventilate and say exactly what you have said. Like somebody says, I've voted for this person because I believed he had the best vision, but you guys didn't vote for him. I'm very disappointed. That's fair. Let's not stifle them and tell them, stop expressing your disappointment in public. Where should they express it? Let them express themselves. Allow people to ventilate. And from that process of ventilation and celebration, things come closer and closer together over time. Even the guy who's celebrating, has to go to Mjengo the next day and make some money.
Yes.
And the guy who is disappointed also has to go to that same place and earn a living. And ultimately, we find that we still are going through the same struggles, which brings the concept of buyer's remorse. Like if you remember, after the last election, there was a lot of similar celebration and disappointment. But as we went further and further from that election, you had people coming together and saying, listen, we're all suffering together.
What do we do here?
The price of unga is affecting all of us the same way. The price of fuel is affecting all of us the same way. But allowing people to ventilate allows those conversations to mature and allows people to come closer and closer together and to realize their common struggles, their common humanity, and that they need to still work together in order to build a better future for ourselves.
if we go to the leader, pardon guys, I'm holding the space. But look, if we go to the leader now and say, look, you're also looking at it. I mean, because he said, be in a position whereby you are able then to speak to the nation, who clearly is divided in terms of the decision that they made.
Yes.
You're looking at, polarization of 50 million people. Right? So there are those who voted for you, there are those who did not, and there are those who did not vote at all. And we're looking at those numbers and they're in equal measure.
Yes.
What responsibility then, beyond these messages, do you have as the chosen one to make sure that you're not dealing with, the perpetration of hostility, for example?
Yeah. So my expectation, and I think in 2017 I wrote a speech for the winning candidate, which I posted on Facebook. The ideal speech from my perspective. And this would be, thank you for electing me as your president through this process. I acknowledge that the country is divided because among those who voted, about half voted for me and about half did not vote for me. I acknowledge this. And I acknowledge the gravity of the task ahead of me, which is to bring these people together to work towards a common destiny for this country. And I will take the following practical steps to ensure that this happens. For instance, the first thing I'm doing is to reach out to my opponents, to sit together and agree that at least for a half of the country, they bought my opponent's vision, and the other half bought my vision. How can we come together to ensure that our visions become the vision for this country, and that nobody feels left out by the mere fact that I won and you lost? This is a kind of statesman-like comportment, if you like.
Sounds like handshake. You're just saying.
Not necessarily. No. So I am not saying. I am not saying
Let's
that.
come together and see that our
so the way we have
visions
designed. The way we have designed our system is that the president wins and is the president. There's no co-president, there's no half-president, there's no quarter-president. You're the president. But that doesn't mean that those that didn't vote for you then are completely disregarded and thrown out there into the wilderness for 5 years. They're still leaders.
I like your speech, but then would it not serve a greater purpose if we simply change the system that we have? There was an attempt at it with the BBI, and we know how that one went. But the real attempt and the opportunity that in my mind was lost was when we were crafting this constitution. The opportunity was there, but it was lost.
So I don't agree it was lost.
What was the opportunity?
Well, the opportunity to have a parliamentarily system, to put it simply. Yes, but the choice was made to have the system that we have. So even when the BBI, when I say lost, you see, I am not alien to the fact that what is lost can be found.
Yes.
No, I'm not alien to that fact. I'm simply saying that in the current dispensation as we have, it isn't there. So for all intents and purposes, it is lost.
So what I think is this, that all those are experiments, in all honesty. All those are experiments. There are countries that have parliamentary systems. There are countries that have pure presidential systems. There are countries that have hybrids in between. There are countries that have monarchies and so on. And all of them have their fair share of challenges and their fair share of successes. At the core of it, it's about who we are as a people. What are our basic values? What are the things that keep us together? So that no matter what system of government is in place, there are certain things we agree that everybody deserves, and there are certain things we agree that people shouldn't have to go
Prof,
through.
are we saying that people ought to be in a position, or they already are in a position, where they can more or less work with every and any system that comes about? Or are we saying that a system will influence the way people go about managing their affairs?
Yeah. So this constitution itself was the product of a process.
Yes.
It was not imposed upon us.
No.
And part of that process is what shaped the constitution the way it is. Because the discussions before 2010 included the possibility of a parliamentary system, included the possibility of a hybrid system, and included the possibility of a presidential system. The haggling, the give and take, the arguments, and ultimately the referendum decided on the system we have today. And so this is what Kenyans gave themselves for the time being. And as we implement it, as we go through it, we'll discover flaws, we'll discover problems. And it's okay to do karabati to try and make it a more perfect constitution. If that ultimately ends up being a parliamentary system, it will happen in due course. If it happens to become a hybrid system, it will happen. If it goes back to a council of elders like we had in the past, so be it. But it will evolve based on those processes, systems that characterize this country. We argue vigorously.
But Prof, consider how it is we have evolved. Look at our electoral processes. And the evolution that I see is an entrenchment of impunity and an acceptance of things that morally should be repugnant, but they become less and less repugnant. Now, if my view has any element of truth to it, such a system and such a thought process that is born out of it, how exactly are they going to evolve out of it when clearly it is there because people favor it, and you're saying we are going to eventually evolve into one which clearly will limit those very, very excesses.
Maybe
So
we'll evolve into
it's about the people.
Yes.
It's about the people. So if you're saying that this society accepts things that are morally repugnant, I go back to the question, to who? To who is it repugnant?
Yeah.
It is actually to them, because I'm not even talking about
Yeah,
me.
yeah, yeah.
They themselves will tell you this shouldn't be done, and I wouldn't do this, and then
yeah.
Then they
and
still
then
go
go
and
and
then
do
it.
it.
And then they themselves do it.
Yes.
So this is where I talk about the role of cognitive dissonance.
Yes.
Yeah. By talking about it as we do, you create this competing narrative inside the mind of a person who does those kinds of things. And that person comes to realization that there are things that I think are evil, but I do them. Do I have an opportunity to stop doing them? That is the process of evolution. Having these continuous discussions about what do we think is repugnant and what is not. Is stealing money meant for sick babies and using it to build a mansion, is that a thing that we would be able to live with? I can tell you in this country, there are people who would be able to live with
Easily.
it. Easily.
And
And
do
they
it
will tell
twice.
you. But there are others who will tell you they can't live with it, but they would do it. And then there are others who would never do it.
But then, Prof, there's what people say they will do, and there's what people say they will live with,
Yeah.
and then there's the reality of what then happens. Because
Exactly.
at that point in time,
Yeah.
when it suits your purposes,
Yeah.
you will argue that it is fine.
Yeah.
But is it really? Because
No.
the very thing that you mention, that war and that discussion that they will have with themselves, what then do we see? When we entrench that which we speak about as being wrong, are we saying that we have become morally immune to any wrong? Or are we saying that we are trying to position ourselves to justify what it is that we are?
I think we're a normal human society.
We are.
We are a normal human society that is full of some people who are really, really bad, everybody acknowledges, and many, many people who are really, really good, and the majority who is in between, with various colors and shades of colors in between. Our task, or the task for this generation, is to increase the number of people who are good and to reduce the number of people who are bad. This is our task. We can be ambitious and say we want to create a society of all good people. We know we will fail. But we can be realistic and say that by the steps we take on a day-to-day basis, we can reduce the number of people that we all agree are really, really bad.
Prof, you've realigned the discussion about nature versus nurture. You've realigned it and introduced a third element to it. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, the truth is you and I both know that things fall in between.
Yes.
But then, given what you do for a living,
Yes.
you will argue that actually some people are actually born with a certain leaning that isn't necessarily positive.
That's true.
Yes.
That's true. And they're psychopaths. We have psychopaths. And I talked about this last time. We have people with antisocial personality traits
Yes.
who set out to harm other people, and they enjoy the process, and they have absolutely no remorse. They're there. We as a society...
That software for remorse doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist.
Yes.
So we as a society classify them as bad people.
Yes.
They're there. And we try to put in place systems to restrain them,
Yes.
to reduce their ability to do harm, or at the very worst, when they are really, really harmful, to put them away so that they no longer interact with the rest of society. That's what we do. And that's what we must do as a generation. Because if we don't do that, then they become some kind of example, even to others who are not psychopaths, but who are impressionable, young people, looking at them doing those things and they say, oh, it's all right to do those things. So we have to set up our society so that firstly, we all acknowledge that what those guys are doing is wrong. Secondly, try and stop them. And where it is really, really difficult to stop them or control them, to put them away. Hide them from the rest of society until they've lived out their lives and, people can find other different ways of doing things. That's the way of dealing with that. And we agree. But we will not become a perfect society because some of those traits of those antisocial fellows, some of those traits are present in people who are not antisocial, and they have made them successful in the endeavors that they do. So you have this leader who some people consider to be a bully, but he's really a good-hearted person. He's trying to do the best that he can, but he has this bullying trait that he forces people to do things a certain way. He's not really antisocial, but he has that trait of bullying, which is also among people who are antisocial. So we will not eliminate that.
It's called leadership. We celebrate. It's a power of persuasion.
Or coercion, I think. That sounds like coercion rather than persuasion. So those traits will be there, and therefore there will be people who might accumulate an unhealthy amount of those traits. But our role is to reduce those people and control those that we cannot completely remove from society.
Speak to those who are feeling as if this election has really not brought anything to them in about a minute or less.
So I will say I acknowledge that. I acknowledge that there are people who are feeling like this election has not brought anything. In fact, it has confirmed certain fears that they had. I acknowledge that. And I think we all must acknowledge that. And then we must agree that we will work continuously to ensure that this happens less and less with every subsequent election until the elections are meaningful to the entire population. This is something we need to aspire to as Kenyans.
Thank you very much. Professor LUKOYE ATWOLI is a professor of psychiatry and the dean at Aga Khan University Medical College. We'll be talking about healing, and I think we'll need more and more of these conversations for the next 6 months.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you very much for tuning in to the Situation Room today. Join us again tomorrow. It will be Thursday. It's Justice Thursday. We're looking for some interesting conversation to have, which will be timely. Let's cross the fingers that one actually comes through. You'll enjoy it.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.